Okay, hello everyone. If I can have your attention, we'll be starting pretty soon here. Okay, I think we're passing out the handbook right now, the pamphlet for this workshop, so you can follow along if you'd like. So, how's everyone feeling? Oh, that doesn't sound very good. So, does anyone feel like they have jet lag already? Yeah? So, I came on the program now. I'm a former ALT, obviously. I was here 8 years ago, and for the full orientation, I was jet lagged out of my mind. So, and I made it. So I'm here. So if you are not feeling so hot, don't worry about it. You'll make it. I will be giving the presentation today entitled Useful Information for ALTs, Private School Edition. My name is Jonathan Allred, and I work at the Council of Local Authorities for International Relations, or CLAIR, as a program coordinator in the Department of JET Program Management. I do plan to leave some time today at the end for questions. So if you have any questions about the material in the presentation, feel free to jot them down now as I ramble on up here. Also, there will be a panel discussion following this presentation. So you are free to ask questions there as well to people who are actively teaching in private schools now. So don't forget that the handout also has useful vocabulary terms and additional information not included here. So try to not get too attached to the handout while I'm talking, because it's kind of hard to listen and read at the same time. But if you do want to take notes, that's fine too. But please try to look at it after the presentation, if possible. Okay. So I'd like to start the presentation by briefly introducing myself. I came to Japan on the JET program in 2010 as an ALT. I was placed in a mid-sized city government in Kumamoto Prefecture on the island of Kyushu, where I stayed for 5 years. Is anyone going to Kumamoto by any chance? Probably not. I don't think there are any private schools using the JET program in Kumamoto. After finishing my time in the JET program, I moved to Tokyo to work for my current employer, CLAIR. While I myself was working in public elementary and junior high schools, I have visited a number of private schools and the JET participants who work at them as a part of my work at CLAIR. Also, in previous years, I have moderated the private school panel discussion, which you'll be attending after this session. So, unfortunately, my experience is not exactly firsthand, but I do have secondhand knowledge, which I've used in talking to private schools and visiting them, that I've incorporated into this presentation. So, hopefully, you will find it useful. Also, if you would like to give us your feedback on the surveys that you'll have, I think those are due later today. So please let me know how I did in the presentation and provide constructive criticism so that we can improve the presentation and make it even more useful in the future. Thank you. All right, so speaking of self-introductions, let's stop and review them for a second, as you'll be giving a few of them at your school very soon. There will be a discussion about self-introduction lessons aimed at the students at the panel discussion following this. But here I'd like to just talk about your initial self-introduction when you arrive at your school and are asked to greet your fellow teachers and staff. So the key points are, number one, keep your self-introduction short, no more than a minute. You can save a more in-depth self-introduction for classes with your students or even conversations with teachers afterwards, but try to keep it very brief. Mention a couple of your hobbies, interests, or maybe even what you studied in university, as this can often lead to conversations with teachers or staff who have the same hobbies or interests and know people who do. So this is a good opportunity when you first get there to let people know what your passions are. First impressions are very important in Japan, so try to keep your hands at your sides or in front of you and have good posture when you give your self-introduction. A bow before and or after your self-introduction also earns bonus points for politeness. And don't forget to smile. You can give your self-introduction in English or Japanese. If you introduce yourself in English, though, remember that you are no longer in your home country. So think about your audience. While the English teachers may understand you speaking at natural speed, some of the staff probably have very limited English ability. Consciously speaking slower, simpler, and clearer than normal and avoiding slang and difficult words will help those with limited English ability to understand you better. The same applies to speaking to students as well. Finally, a good self-introduction in Japan always ends with the phrase "yoroshiku onegai shimasu." I'm sure you've heard it a few times and probably said it. It's a hard word to translate naturally into English, but in the context of your self-introduction means something like "it's nice to meet you" or "I look forward to working with you all." So even if you give your introduction in English, it's probably good to just kind of throw this phrase in at the end to let people know that you're done and to show that you've heard about this phrase. There's a sample self-introduction in the handout in the useful terms index, which is in the back, so you can use that to practice later. Okay, well, it might seem a little bit silly to practice introducing yourself, but you may be more nervous than you think when you're actually put in front of a room full of Japanese people and you have to introduce yourself in your native language. It's kind of more pressure than you think. So I recommend that you just practice a couple of times, also to get the pacing down and to get what kind of words you want to say down. It'll probably help you be less nervous when you actually give yourself an introduction in front of those people. Okay, so there are two essential aims for this session today. One is to help lessen the gap between expectations and reality, and two is to help you be an effective ALT. Presumably you have heard and read about being an ALT online from friends or even Claire publications such as the General Information Handbook. Generally, however, it is more difficult to find information specifically for private school ALTs, so your expectations may be less clear than public school ALTs. One of the goals of this presentation is to give you a realistic picture of what it's like to work in a Japanese private school as an ALT. The second goal of this presentation is to provide practical advice based on my own experiences and those of my colleagues about how to be an effective ALT. By effective, I mean a proactive ALT, well-liked and respected by your fellow staff members and students. I also mean someone who can adjust smoothly to being an ALT and contribute their knowledge and skills to the school. So as for the gap between expectations and reality, what are your expectations of Japanese students? You may be expecting the students to be very polite, given that politeness is highly valued in Japan. You may be expecting Japanese students to be more well-behaved than students in your home country, given that order and harmony are so highly valued in Japan. You may be expecting private school students to come from wealthy families or a certain background, especially if such associations are made in your home country. You may be expecting the students to be generally interested in English, as it is the language of various forms of media, pop culture, and other such things in many countries, including Japan. But what are the realities? Welcome to English class. Okay, well, I admit this is a bit of an exaggeration put in for comedic effects. But sometimes a few students will actually doze off in your class, especially if there are not very many activities in your class, or if it's right after lunch and it's really hot and there's no air conditioning, some stuff like that. Of course, a sleeping student here or there doesn't necessarily mean a lesson is boring or that they are uninterested in English. Japanese students are incredibly busy, which you'll soon understand and be able to sympathize with. Some of the expectations from the previous slide may be closer to reality than others, though. For example, personally, I feel that students here are more polite and well-behaved than students in the US, where I'm from, although it depends on the grade level in school. Possibly this is because Japanese teachers tend to be more stern with their students than you may be used to. Still, your students may come out and ask you if you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend. I also had students with behavioral problems who would continually disrupt class, but unlike schools in the US, for example, there isn't really a system of separating students from the rest of the class when they misbehave, so they're in the class whether you like it or not. My expectations of student interest in English and Western culture were definitely not so close to reality. Even though I had lived in Japan before JET, most of the Japanese people I met at that time were adults who were interested in English, foreign cultures, and my reasons for coming to Japan. I had, of course, heard from my predecessor that some students were not motivated to speak English. Still, I was surprised to hear some students admit that they were not interested in English at all or found it too difficult, even at their age. Perhaps the greatest surprise was the biggest motivator for students to study English is not interest in a foreign culture, people, or language, but what do you think? Tests, yeah. University or high school entrance exams, yes. Again, I had heard about these entrance exams before becoming an ALT, but I was surprised by the reality of just how much they actually do impact the students and their viewpoint and the class curriculum and the teachers as well. So my advice to all of you is, I think you heard Richard say this in the opening speech, but lower your expectations. I know that doesn't sound motivating, but I think it's easier to lose motivation if you come in with high, lofty expectations that are not met. Some of your students will be very interested in English and foreign cultures, and it will be easy for you to teach them and converse with them and even motivate them more. Other students may not be so interested in English or other cultures currently, but with some work on your part, they might become more interested in such things. This is usually best done by finding out what interests these students and then finding a way to connect that to English, your experiences, your culture, and so on. And then there are some students who, dare I say, are beyond reach. For them, it may take some kind of significant life event other than school or you, meeting you, to get them interested in English, or maybe they will never be interested, and that's understandable too. Regardless of what kind of students you work with, it's always best to find out what your students are interested in and incorporate these topics into lessons and conversations. That's right, this requires learning about things you may not be interested in. Okay, so speaking of expectations versus reality, just for fun, here is my custom meme for being an ALT. So this has not been tested on anyone before, so we'll just see how it goes. If it's really terrible, I'll change it for Group B. Let me know by your laughter or lack thereof. Okay, so what my friends think I do, okay. So somebody's like backpacker traveling through Asia, you know. What my students think I do, this is especially true for me in elementary school, but I think you'll probably still feel it. They feel like you're like some kind of English hero, a foreign gaikoku hero, you know, you're cool. What your parents think you do, directionless, without a career, wasting time in Japan when you could be, you know, doing X, Y, and Z back home. What my teachers think I do, self-explanatory, right? What I think I do, okay, yeah, proper teacher. What you really do, okay, no, don't get angry, this is a joke, okay. I showed this to my colleague and they're like, you can't do that to them. I was like, I have to, no. I'm sure you've heard stories, and it does happen to some people, but I want to change it to be something more positive, because I don't think that's what everyone is limited to, honestly. I think it does happen, but I think there's ways out of it and things you can do. So in my opinion, what you really do is you are a cultural ambassador. You're an assistant to the Japanese teacher. You're there to make classes more fun, more interesting, more real for students. Okay, so on to more serious matters. So in order to help lessen the gap between expectations and reality, I'd like to first talk about what distinguishes a private school from a public school. We will talk about these topics a little bit more in depth, I think, at the panel discussion after this, but I'll just kind of briefly touch on some of the things that I've noticed. So image depends on region. So this is probably new for some people. How Japanese people view public and private high schools depends on the area of the country. So in general, in more rural prefectures, public high schools have a more appealing image compared to private high schools. However, this image is generally reversed in wealthy metropolitan areas like Tokyo, where private high schools tend to be more attractive to potential students than public schools. So I won't get into all the reasons for why that is, but it's something that you might want to be aware of, and you could talk with other Japanese people and see how they feel about it. But the Japanese people I asked, this is what they told me. Common for junior high school and senior high school to be under the same school. So unlike public schools, it is not uncommon to find that multiple levels of school are included within the same campus or the same school unit. So this means that as an ALT, you may be involved in teaching at multiple levels. Some private schools also have an elementary or possibly even kindergarten attached, and some are part of a university. So I know one private school ALT who told me that he works at half of his classes are at junior high and the other half are at kindergarten. So that's a very unique, interesting situation that you would not find in a public school. So just be prepared for, you might have to be a little bit more flexible in terms of the ages that you teach. Private school ALTs, oops, I forgot to click. Private school ALTs may work with another JET participant at the same school or with foreign nationals hired directly by the school. In some cases, your supervisor might even be a foreign national. All of these things are exceedingly rare for public school ALTs. As you might guess, the number of public schools using the JET program far exceeds the number of private schools. In fact, it is a relatively recent phenomenon for private schools to employ JET participants, at least in the numbers that they have. This means that depending on your placement, there's a chance that your school has either never had a JET participant before or has only had maybe one or two. Probably don't have a long history with the program. Therefore, you may have to deal with a certain amount of uncertainty or lack of understanding about the JET program and its aims. But remember that because of this, you also may be able to have more influence on how the school views the JET program and your role as an ALT, because their views are not so entrenched as maybe a public school would be. Okay, some private schools may have weekend classes. Whether or not you're required to teach on these days is something you must discuss with your school. But of course, if you work on the weekend, you'll be provided time off in exchange during the week. Some private schools have a religious affiliation, most commonly Buddhist or Christian. While this should not really affect your work duties per se, it's probably something that you should be considerate of if it applies to you in your school. While you may find that some of the part-time staff at your school change in April with the rollover of the fiscal year, generally speaking, full-time private school teachers and employees do not change regularly like they do in public schools. So this is kind of a good and bad thing, I guess. Don't be surprised if there are some special perks at your school. You may have opportunities to teach students preparing to go abroad. You may have better equipment and technology, more money at your school. You may have a nicer building than the average public school, or it's even possible that you might have more time off in the summer. I've heard of ALTs who just didn't have to come in the summer and just had, didn't have to take any time off. I'm not saying that's going to be your case, so don't quote me on that. But some things like that happen. So, sometimes I think people who get placed in private school feel like they're underprepared or that they're at a disadvantage because of X, Y, and Z. But also, I'm just trying to say, remember that you may have special perks that you're not aware of that people in public schools or other private schools don't have. Okay, so one of the most common gaps between expectations and reality is in relation to ALT roles. First and foremost, it almost goes without saying, but please check your individual terms and conditions, which is the contract between you and your new employer. While Claire proposes a model for the terms and conditions to be used for private school ALTs, schools are able to modify these terms and conditions slightly to meet their specific situation. Your official work duties are listed in your terms and conditions, so it is hard to overstate the importance of making sure that you understand them at an early stage. That being said, the duties on screen are the most common duties which ALTs perform, so don't be surprised to see some or all of these in your list of official duties. I'd like to draw special attention to the last bullet point, other duties as deemed necessary by the principal. So, in general, no, this doesn't mean that you're going to be asked to scrub the toilets or something like that, or serve lunch to people and stuff. But more, it's just kind of to cover things that don't fall under the other categories so that the school doesn't have to list literally every single thing that you're asked to do as part of your work. So, for example, they might ask you to hold a weekly English lunch club. So maybe they have a classroom available for you and you can eat your lunch in there and students can come and eat lunch with you and speak English if they want or something. That's just an example. Or you could be asked to coach certain students who are planning to go abroad. That might not fall in the other categories, so it might be the other duties. Once you have checked your terms and conditions for your official work duties, it is recommended that you discuss what each of these items means for your situation with your supervisor when you arrive at school. Having this conversation early on can prevent misunderstandings about your role as an ALT at the school. It's an important conversation to have, but it's also important that you talk to your teachers before each lesson to confirm what your role will be for that specific class. So, for example, will you be expected to plan an activity for an upcoming class? Or will you be asked to demonstrate a conversation on a given topic with the main teacher? Do you know what the topic's going to be? Can you ad lib? Is it something that you need to, memorize? Having these kinds of conversations before class can help you avoid being caught off guard in front of the students or having an awkward situation in class where it is unclear who is doing what. Try to be flexible in your role as an ALT. You will likely be teaching with more than one teacher, even if you're at just one school, which means that you'll probably have to adjust your role according to each teacher. This is kind of what Richard was talking about yesterday morning, and I'll elaborate a bit more. Some teachers tend naturally to be more understanding of the ALT role and will include you in class in interesting and useful ways naturally. Other teachers may be less sure of how to utilize you in class, so it's best not to expect the same from all of your teachers, but rather get to know each teacher's style and try to maximize your role in accordance with that. Finally, if you feel underutilized by a teacher, which is not uncommon to hear from ALTs, try to work up to more responsibility and better utilization. So before you suggest new ways in which you can contribute to the lesson or English education, it's important that you demonstrate you are great at the job you've been asked to do, and thus capable of much more. For example, if you feel that you are only being used to pronounce certain English words in class, but would actually like to lead conversation activities and have more input in the lesson, first prove to the teacher that you are reliable, professional, and take even simple tasks like modeling pronunciation seriously. Once a relationship of trust has been built, it may be easier to begin suggesting other ways you can contribute to English classes. However, if you are confrontational or overly negative from the start about your role as a pronunciation model in class, you may damage the relationship of trust and make it harder for the teacher to accept your suggestions in the future. In other words, attitude is really important. It's also important for you to know your teachers and school's goals for English education. If the teacher's sole goal is teaching grammatical accuracy for university entrance exams, then maybe you can try to frame your suggestions for class activities or lessons in terms of how they will improve the student's grammatical accuracy and thus be beneficial for their entrance exams. All right, so let's go back to the second aim of today's presentation, what makes an effective ALT. I've included 4 different aspects, which are good communication, professionalism, knowledge of Japan, and getting involved. As you can see, our ALT friend here doesn't look very happy. He doesn't have a good grasp of these things. So let's try to improve his situation by first talking about good communication. Any discussion of good communication as an ALT would not be complete without mentioning how busy Japanese teachers are. You've probably heard this. In addition to teaching their subject or grade level, most teachers are also responsible for various other duties around the school. Of course, teachers in Japan have to teach classes, prepare lessons and materials, grade papers, and make tests. But schools in Japan aren't simply considered places for academic study, they are thought of as places for students to learn life lessons as well. For this reason, you may be taken aback by some of the responsibilities Japanese teachers have, some of which may typically belong to the parents in our societies. For starters, their official work duties may include club activity management, which may include supervising practices after school and on weekends, homeroom duties, such as keeping in touch with parents and visiting the students' houses, career counseling, which sometimes includes visiting universities or potential places of work with the students, cleaning with the students, student discipline, which is not limited to when the students are at school even, greeting the students as they arrive at the school gates in the morning, checking their attire and behavior, and also attending meetings during the school week and seminars and training events during summer vacation. My intention is not to discourage you. I think it's just important to understand how busy your fellow Japanese teachers are and know that a lot of them want to interact with you more, but they may struggle to find the time. For this reason, I think it's important that you don't hesitate too much in approaching them about lessons. While you are all assistants and might naturally expect to frequently receive information and instructions from your teachers, in reality this doesn't always happen perfectly, especially with schools who are using the JET program for the first time and maybe used to someone who has better Japanese or who has been teaching longer. If you find yourself not feeling not as informed as you'd like to be or kind of out of the loop, it's easy to get negative, but it's more productive if you do something to try to improve the situation, such as being more proactive in asking teachers and politely encouraging the staff to share more information with you on a regular basis. This will benefit not only you, but also the people who come after you. Good communication is essential for smooth team teaching and a positive experience in the JET program. So find a way and time to communicate that works for you and each of your teachers. One of the positive results of teachers having all these responsibilities outside of teaching their subject is that they have frequent interaction with their students, and thus there tend to be very strong bonds that develop between teachers and students. So the teachers know the students extremely well, and they can help you when you're planning your lessons. So I highly recommend that you consult with your teachers frequently, maybe keep a notebook and ask them about certain classes and the students, maybe if they have learning disabilities, but also if they have strengths, if they have interests, or goals outside of English that the teacher is trying to work towards. Maybe you can work towards those as well in your English classes if you know them. So I recommend consulting with your fellow teachers often. Okay, so now on to the chain of communication. It's important to know who to go to if you have a question or concern. Your main point of contact will be your supervisor, Tantosha in Japanese, or Japanese teacher of language. It's possible that this is the same person too. It's useful to know the various roles of the other teachers and staff in case your main point of contact is busy or unavailable. This is a summary of the school faculty and their roles. The principal, who's the purple figure, acts as the face or representative of the school. The vice principal, is the green figure, manages the daily running of the school. Questions about taking time off and school schedule are usually best directed towards the vice principal. Below the principal and vice principal, there are teachers, school nurse, office staff, and part-time staff. The teachers are your most frequent point of contact, so matters related to workload, lessons, training, students are all best addressed to teachers. The school nurse oversees the nurse's room and students' health and hygiene. If you're feeling sick, you can also go to the nurse's room to take a rest or ask about nearby hospitals or clinics. The office staff and accountant manage your paperwork, such as applying for your healthcare card, paying your salary and taxes. Questions about these matters or JET paperwork or even living arrangements that are provided by the school are usually best directed to the office staff. As far as when to ask, of course, it's best to ask as soon as possible. But if the conversation seems like it might take more than a few minutes, it's probably best for you to use your powers of observation and try to find a time when the person doesn't look like they're really busy with something or that they have a short break to talk. In terms of how to, bring up the conversation, even if the person's not rushed, I always like to ask something like, "Excuse me, I have a question about today's afternoon class. Do you have a minute to talk about it?" I think that's a little bit more polite than saying, "Hey, sensei, can you tell me a little bit more about today's afternoon class?" Which kind of implies that your teacher definitely has time to talk now, and it puts them on the spot. So I think politeness is extremely important in Japan. It's hard to be too polite. So I recommend taking the former approach and just asking if they have time to discuss something before just going into it. There are a few more quick points about the chain of communication. So if you really are not sure who to ask or consult with, it's usually best to start with the teacher or staff closest to you and work your way up. Face-to-face communication is obviously most efficient, but when you're having trouble finding time to chat face-to-face, consider using email, texting, sticky notes, or even a shared notebook or folder in which you can leave lesson plans, activities, notes, etc. Okay, so let's look at a few examples of the chain of communication. First, let's say that you've been having stomach problems and you are unsure of which clinic to go to. Who do you ask for advice? So as this is an issue of health, it may be good to first speak with your school nurse, who will likely be able to provide advice on local clinics. Another option might be to reach out to your prefectural advisor or advisors, who you'll probably meet at your local orientation after you finish this one and arrive at your placements. Your prefectural advisor may have information about clinics in your area or region, which may have an English-speaking doctor. Yet another option is to reach out to Japan Healthcare Info, as you heard about yesterday. In some cases, if needed, you may be able to ask a Japanese or Japanese-speaking foreign staff member at your school to come with you to the clinic. But if this is not possible, consider asking a Japanese friend or consulting with a prefectural advisor about potential interpretation options. As your health is more important than anything, it's hard to be an effective ALT if you aren't healthy. So make sure that you get the help you need early on by communicating with others and trying different options. As a reminder of what you heard yesterday morning in the essential information presentation, sometimes miscommunications and problems occur over sick leave between ALTs and Japanese employers, given that there are many cultural differences in the perception of sick leave. In order to avoid having these problems yourself, I recommend that you confirm the necessary procedures and applicable situations before you get sick for the first time. Okay, so it's not uncommon for ALTs to receive mail which they cannot read. You may not even be able to tell, is this a bill? Is it a notice? Is it something that you can just throw away? So who should you talk to if you can't read a piece of mail? Well, first and foremost, do not throw away the piece of mail if you're unsure of its content. Sometimes we hear stories about this when it was actually a bill. So it may be something important. So please try to keep all mail that you're not aware of. It may be good to ask someone in the office, staff room, who deals with your paperwork, insurance, and taxes about this. However, you could probably just as easily ask a Japanese friend. It's okay to ask Jet friends, but they may not understand the contents of the mail as well as you might hope. Even if they speak some Japanese, it's probably still safest to ask a native Japanese speaker. In general, until you get your bank account set up and start making automatic payments for things such as rent, cell phone, whatever, you will receive a monthly bill in the mail, which you can pay at a convenience store. Let's say that you want to take off a few days to travel to Thailand because your friend from home is going to be there at the same time. Unfortunately, it's in November, during the middle of the school year. Who do you talk to? First of all, make sure that you talk to someone before you buy tickets or assume that you'll be able to take off because you have enough days of paid leave left. Like most jobs, there are times when it is easier or better to take off than others. Given that you will all be working in schools, it shouldn't be surprising that employers generally prefer their ALTs to take consecutive days of paid leave during breaks in the school year, such as summer break or over end of the year holidays. For example, when I was an ALT, my employer had a policy that I could not take off more than 4 consecutive days during the school year. But things were a little bit more relaxed during the breaks. Pretty much take, consecutive days as much as I wanted, as long as I was communicated when I wanted to take off. Generally, taking a day or two here or there during the school year is not a big problem, but of course this depends on how far in advance you ask, if there happens to be an important event on that day, or other factors. Although it's common sense, I cannot stress enough the importance of consulting with your school at an early stage about your paid leave plans to avoid misunderstandings. Keep in mind that substitute teachers are pretty much unheard of in Japan, so your Japanese counterparts generally can't take off multiple days in a row during the school year either. Needless to say, it is In most cases, you will not have a substitute teacher either, so extended time away from the school during the school year can cause problems. Now for who to talk to. It's probably best to first consult with your main supervisor, the person you report to directly. After discussing your plans with the supervisor, you and or they may have to consult with the vice principal as well, because he or she oversees teacher attendance and leave at the school. Finally, don't forget to tell your school how they can reach you if you go abroad. They may also ask you for a simple itinerary of where you are going, but don't take this the wrong way. Your school may ask for this kind of information so that they can contact you in case of an emergency, such as a large earthquake in Japan while you were away, or perhaps if you were hurt, lose your passport, or experience a natural disaster in the area you are visiting. Okay, so having good communication helps to build good work relationships. One way to have good communication is to keep it frequent. Here are some pointers. Don't always wait for your teachers and fellow staff members to come talk to you. Make sure you do your part to initiate conversations, be flexible, proactive, and make persistent efforts to keep up communication. Asking if you can help is a great way to build work relationships and increase communication. Even offering to help with simple things like shutting the windows when they turn the air conditioning on or emptying trash cans, things like that can help show that you're a member of the staff and not just a guest in the school. Try to attend school events as much as you can. The benefits of participating definitely transfer to the classroom and your relationships with the other teachers and students. It's not just enough to simply communicate often, though. It's important to have quality communication. So learn about what your coworkers' interests are and what their personalities are like, and not just the English teachers. Getting to know teachers of other subjects and other staff members helps you to make friends, gives you a bigger support network when you need help, and helps you, again, feel more like a member of the staff. Observe good social conduct. So always be polite and helpful. Try to avoid openly emotional responses to decisions, policies, and comments that bother you. Instead, try to be calm, considerate, and composed. Always ask for permission to use things that belong to other staff members or the school. Phrases like "excuse me," "I'm sorry," and "thank you" are very important in Japan, so please use them often. If you're going to be late, call ahead and let your school know. Don't expect others to always share your values or culture, or make an effort to learn about and respect the values, cultures, and accepted social conduct here. Also, I can't stress enough the importance of studying Japanese. As you probably heard, Claire does offer a grant if you want to take the JLPT level 3 or above. Also, we have Japanese language courses, which you can take for free. But the best ways to learn Japanese is to speak to people. It's the most fun. So talk to your students, not in class, talk to them if you see them on the street, or talk to your teachers during lunch, or when you have a free period, and get involved in the community so you can speak as much Japanese as possible. Okay, so don't forget that there are some things that you can find out without having to communicate with others. Your staff room will probably have a few boards like this one with various kinds of useful information, such as a monthly event calendar, students' attendance figures, 2-day schedule, teachers who are absent or on business trips, schedule changes, meetings, etc. So even if you can't read all the Japanese at first, it's worth learning where things are written on the board so you can dissect them later. When you first arrive and are shown the staff room, it may be good just to ask your English teacher or another staff member to kind of give you a tour of the staff room and find out where these boards are. Maybe you could just ask them at that time where the important information like scheduling and stuff like that is. Many of the miscommunications between ALTs and Japanese staff occur over issues with the schedule, such as a lack of communication about the kind of schedule for the day or events that affect the schedule. For example, you might have a shortened schedule on Wednesdays due to teacher meetings in the afternoon, or a special schedule on a day with practice for sports day. Make sure to obtain a copy of all the possible schedules your school has right at the beginning. It's a good idea to confirm the next day's schedule every day before you leave the office. Keep in mind that the schedule may change suddenly too, especially due to inclement weather. We're now in typhoon season, so it probably will happen. Although not written on the schedule, there's normally a teacher's meeting in the morning before classes start too. Whether you need to attend this is something that you should consult with your school about. If you are required or choose to attend, this meeting could be a good source of information. But obviously it will be all in Japanese. So whether you attend or not, always communicate with your English teachers after the meeting to confirm whether anything affecting your classes was mentioned. So with a solid grasp on good communication, our ALT friend's grade has risen, but there's still much to cover before he can be considered an effective ALT. So let's talk about professionalism. Okay, so the following pictures are all considered bad manners in a Japanese workplace. So might be some surprises in here, or maybe you guys know your stuff already. So starting with the picture in the upper left, try to stand up when someone comes to talk to you, especially your boss or someone senior to you. It's seen as a sign of respect in Japan. Avoid putting your hands in your pockets, especially in front of the students, but just in general, Japanese people tend not to put their hands in their pockets. Also, avoid listening to music at work, even through earbuds. Others will probably be able to hear the music in a quiet staff room, and it makes it harder for others to approach you and start a conversation. However, if you are listening to English sound bites or audio related to your classes, of course, you should wear earbuds to avoid disturbing other people. Also, try to avoid using your mobile phone as much as possible. Even if you are doing like work-related things, others may not know that, and they might just assume that you're texting or playing games. So computers tend to be better for work-related tasks in general, I find. If you need to make a personal call, just politely, step out of the staff room into a quiet area and just let someone else know that you've got to, take a call or make a call. Don't ever sit or lean on any desk, and never put your feet on a desk or table. Also, there are separate slippers for the bathroom in Japan, so please use them. When you leave the bathroom, make sure you line them up nicely so that it is easy for the next person to put them on. Do these look lined up nicely? So, yes, no. While this seems like a really small thing, schools seem to consider a pretty important manner for students to learn to line up the bathroom slippers or indoor shoes, maybe at the entrance to the school, in an orderly fashion. I think the reason is not only that it looks nicer to other staff members and guests who come into the school, but also it just shows consideration for others, making it easier for the next person who uses them since they're shared objects. This is a core Japanese value, showing consideration for others, so I think that's where it comes from. Also, I haven't included a picture here, but pointing at people with your index finger is considered rude in Japan. So when you want to point at a student whose name you forgot, for example, point with your hand flat like this. So you in the front row or you in the back. Point with your hand open like this. Of course, you will all make mistakes with manners, and that's okay. Sometimes making mistakes is the best way to learn. But especially in Japan, where people tend to avoid confrontation, others may not tell you if you have bad manners in a certain situation. This is just one reason why it is important to be constantly, persistently observant of others. Observing your teachers in class will help you to further develop your teaching skills, and observing people around you will help you to adjust to life in Japan and feel like less of an outsider. In terms of dress code, in general, for most teaching days, the appropriate attire is business or business casual. So no smart casual or casual. Please be aware that smart casual, and I've already said that. Okay. For women, in terms of dress code, for most teaching days, again, probably want to stick with formal, business or business casual. So here's a guide for that. Okay, part of being professional is looking the part. So here are some pointers on the dress code for school. Clothing in Japan tends to be more conservative than many of the countries from which JET participants come, especially in rural areas. If you were ever in doubt about what to wear, it's always best to dress conservative or formal. Dress for the occasion. Don't wear your regular work attire for the graduation ceremony. You'll very likely be underdressed. If you're really unsure what to wear, ask your colleagues in advance. Observe your coworkers. In the first week or so, take note of what the other teachers are wearing. Try to keep the same level of formality in attire as the majority of staff members. One way to avoid embarrassment and discomfort of being underdressed or having an unexpected ceremony that don't have clothes for would be to leave a set of more formal clothes like a suit in your locker at school. You may also want to keep athletic wear at school if you want to participate in PE classes sometimes or play with the kids during lunch or something like that. Be mindful of tattoos. Tattoos still have a negative image in Japan, even if your school knows that you have tattoos in advance of you coming. They still may ask you to cover these tattoos if they're visible. Please respect their wishes. Be aware that, especially in rural Japan, despite your best efforts to cover up your tattoos at school, sometimes your students will see them exposed when you're going about your business around town, and word will travel fast, especially in a small town. So while some may feel that teaching Japanese people about the culture surrounding tattoos in their home country is a form of grassroots internationalization, actually schools are probably not the best place to try to give this, to try to explain this or get understanding about this, given that they have a particularly conservative culture. My advice is to be careful about who sees your tattoos and to do additional internet research on why tattoos carry a negative image in Japan in order to understand the culture here. Many teachers do not wear heavy makeup or jewelry or dye their hair because the students are not allowed. So you are a role model for your students. If they see you wearing with brightly colored hair or piercings, they may want these things too. And then when they tell their parents and the parents tell the school comes back to you, it could get awkward. So it's probably best to be conservative and observe those around you. Teachers are considered role models for students, as I just said. So many teachers adhere to the same school rules as their students to set an example. So as an ALT, you may have a little bit more leeway than your Japanese counterparts and students. I mean, you're not going to know everything at the beginning anyway. So, but it's still best if you follow the school rules as best as possible when you learn them. So I'll just give you an example of a couple of school rules here. One is no eating or drinking during class. Always ask your JTL in advance if you want to give out candy or food in class too. Some students may have allergies that you're not aware of. I once brought a carbonated soft drink to school and I put it on my desk, and this was against the school rules, of course. So the vice principal came over and explained it to me very politely. So after that, I just made sure that I brought only tea or water to school, or if I wanted to have a soft drink, I would put it in a non-clear container. So it's up to you what you want to do. No coats or scarves. Try wearing innerwear. There's something called heat tech. I don't know if you've been to Japan before, you probably are aware. Sold in Uniqlo or other department stores. You can also find disposable heat packs called Cairo. Those are found in convenience stores in the winter, in the colder months. You can put those on your back or in your shoes or in your pocket. Students keep their cell phones in their bags or locker throughout the day. So if you want to play music in class or use your phone as a stopwatch, for example, it's best to just let your teacher know in advance that you want to use it instead of just pulling it out. Okay, so this is an example of what a staff room might look like. As you can see, it's a communal workspace and space can be limited. So part of being professional as an ALT is being considerate and aware of those around you in this kind of environment, which means keeping your desk clean and tidy, but also trying to avoid loud, distracting noises such as overly excited conversation, excessive force when typing on your keyboard or blowing your nose really loudly, which ideally should be done in the bathroom or just maybe somewhere quieter, away from the other teachers who are trying to concentrate. I once heard about an ALT who practiced a musical instrument in the staff room, so I would not recommend that. Distracting smells can also present a problem. You'll probably notice that most Japanese people, especially teachers, don't wear cologne or perfume, or at least it isn't detectable. So if you tend to use such products rather liberally, your coworkers may find it overpowering as they're not used to it and space is limited. So if you're worried about smelling during the hot, humid months of summer, like most people are, consider bringing a small towel or maybe some disposable wipes, which they sell in the convenience store. And you can use those throughout the day. They're very commonly used by Japanese people, so no one's going to look at you weird. Okay, so our ALT is making progress now that he has a good grasp on good communication and professionalism. So let's talk about knowledge of Japan and Japanese. Okay, so you all came on JET to be ambassadors for your culture and country and to teach English in Japanese schools and communities, but don't forget what the E in JET stands for. I know you've heard this before, but it's not English, it's exchange, right? So you're not expected to accept or understand all of Japanese culture or speak perfect Japanese, but still, the more you know about Japanese culture and customs, and the more the language you can speak and understand, the more opportunities you will have, right? So with that in mind, let's talk about aisatsu, an important part of Japanese culture. This word is usually translated as greetings, but I find that it kind of goes over that. In English, it really means set phrases. It includes things like traditional English greetings like good morning, but can also refer to phrases that are said in certain situations that have no direct equivalent in English. So for example, you may notice that students have to say a set phrase when they come to the teacher's room before they are permitted to enter the room. The students may also have to say set phrases before starting and ending each class to show that they're ready to learn or that they're thankful to the teacher. At first, it may seem really strange to greet the entire staff room as you enter or leave, but it's perfectly acceptable, and it's even encouraged for you to greet everyone loudly. So here are a few greetings or aisatsu that you can use at school. Ohayo gozaimasu means good morning. Otsukare-sama desu. This one is probably one of the ultimate aisatsu. You may not have heard this before coming to Japan. It's not taught so frequently as phrases like "ohayou gozaimasu," but you'll probably hear this a lot more than you hear like "konnichiwa," for example, which is a surprise to me when I came. It literally means you must be tired, but it's a greeting that's used in the later morning, afternoon, or evening to acknowledge the other person has been working hard. So think of it as hello. It could also mean goodbye between colleagues, but it's really more for use in the workplace, not so much between friends and family. お先に失礼します. This one takes a bit of practice to say correctly, but it means please excuse me for leaving before you, or it's rude of me to leave before you. So try to say this each day before you leave the office to let people know that you're not going to be coming back to the staff room, but that you're going home for the day. And the other teachers in response to this will say お疲れ様でした, which is the past tense form of お疲れ様です, like, oh, you worked hard today, kind of thing. よろしくお願いします, as we just introduced. This is another champion of aisatsu that has a lot of meanings, such as nice to meet you. It's also used when you ask a favor, such as like when you ask a teacher to check an activity that you made, you could say at the end, like, よろしくお願いします would be a very natural way to end that conversation. There are also many more usages for this phrase that I don't have time to cover here. So if you hear it somewhere and you don't understand, like, what do they mean by that? It seems kind of ambiguous. Just ask somebody, what do you actually mean by that? There's more examples of useful Japanese phrases at the back of the handout, which you can grab. I guess you already have now. Yeah. I'm sure everyone already knows that bowing is a part of Japanese culture, but you may not know that there are actually different degrees of bows based on the situation. So there's 3 types of bows, basically. The one on the far left is 15 degrees. It's a rather informal bow, used, for example, when teachers pass each other in the hallway. So normally it's polite to stop when you bow, but sometimes if they're just passing each other in the hallway, they'll just kind of like either not stop or very briefly. So just something to get used to. Second, we have the 30-degree bow, which is usually held in position for 2 or 3 seconds before raising one's head back up to eye level. This is the bow you want to give before or after your self-introduction. Obviously, it doesn't have to be exactly 30 degrees, but just kind of aim for that. No one's going to be like, that's 29 degrees. On the far right, we have the 45-degree bow, which is the most formal, and it's held in place for a few seconds. This bow is rarely used. It's usually for when you're expressing deep regret or apology. So I hope that we never see this from anyone here, because you're not going to do anything that requires this much apology. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but just try to observe the degree to which people are bowing around you, especially like you'll be doing a lot of bowing in ceremonies, like graduation, something like that. So basically you just need to bow with everyone else, but just try to like look around and see what other people are doing to adjust yours accordingly. You've probably heard of omiyage. This is a very important part of Japanese culture. It's normally translated as souvenir, but really it just means like sweets, which are usually individually wrapped, and they're sold in boxes with numbers on the outside so you can tell how many. Very convenient. So when you get to your school, like find out how many people are working in the staff room. If you have a huge school, maybe you can just limit your omiyage to like the English teachers or like people who sit close to you or something. But if you have like 20 or 30 people, it's probably okay to just buy for the whole office. Not too expensive, I don't think. Normally when people go on a trip, they will bring back omiyage, but also if you start a job, usually you bring them too. So if you have them with you, it's great. If you don't worry about it too much. You'll have plenty of chances to bring them later. It's not required. But it is a nice gesture, and it can lead to conversations with the staff about where you went, or if you bring them from home, maybe it's a good chance to introduce what's popular in your country or what you like, right? So if you don't have enough for everyone, be discreet when you pass them out, obviously. Another way that you can get around this is just put them on a table. Usually there's a designated table for omiyage because people bring them in pretty frequently. Put them there and put a note on it and say, like, please take them freely or something like that. Like I don't have enough for everyone or something. That way people know that it's like first come, first serve. Normally you can find omiyage at train stations, airports, and department stores too. So if you travel, it's very convenient to buy them as well. Be aware that there is an accepted way to give and receive objects between people in Japanese culture, especially in formal environments like the workplace. So when you receive an important paper or business card, make sure to receive it with both hands. And when you give objects to other people, use both hands as well, as you can see in these pictures. Whether you drink alcohol or not, if you attend an inkai or work party where drinks are served, be aware of the proper etiquette for pouring drinks and receiving. In general, younger staff pour drinks for the older, more senior staff, and those around you will rush to fill up your glass, so you don't really need to worry about filling your own. If you notice that someone around you has an empty glass or their drink is getting low, It's polite to offer to fill it up, or if they've ordered something that you don't have a picture for, you can just call over the waiter and say, hey, can you have another tea for this person or something like that. It's a nice polite gesture. In terms of proper chopstick etiquette, I won't go over that because there's a lot of things to cover, but please just try to review them before you go to your first big party. Okay, so now our ALT is doing really well. Finally, let's talk about getting involved at school. One of the best ways to be involved in school is to not just be involved in English classes, but to get involved in school events. So for some events, your attendance is important, but you may not necessarily have a role, unfortunately. This is true of most ceremonies where you basically just need to be dressed appropriately and bow and clap at the right times as everyone else. So entrance ceremony and opening ceremony. The first ceremony of the school year is called the entrance ceremony in April. At this time, first-year students are officially welcomed into the school as new members. Parents and relatives will also be present. Along with the graduation ceremony, this is one of the most formal and meticulously planned ceremonies of the year. You may be asked to give a self-introduction, a short one, in front of the school at this time. If so, follow the other teacher's lead. So in my experience, it's usually a line of teachers like you see in the picture here. One person will step forward at a time and just say their name, maybe what they teach. So you could just step forward and say your name. I'm the ALT, or I teach English, and then just step back and, yoroshiku onegaishimasu kind of thing. Not too difficult, but just be prepared for the fact that you might have to do that. Moving on, we have Sports Day, which, unlike a lot of the ceremonies, is a lot of fun. So it's a chance to get really close with your students and staff members. You'll probably be involved in the events if you go. It's a day-long event where you divide into teams and they compete against each other for points and bragging rights. And they have like relay races, obstacle races, tug of war, etc. They also had like a dance, the ones that I went to, like a local dance where relatives, community members, teachers all gathered in. So it's such a big deal that they might even cancel some of the classes leading up to that. So don't be surprised if some of your English classes the week before are canceled. Okay, so relay race and like a centipede race or something like that. They've tied their feet together. Yeah. School festival is another event which you can attend. This is generally more arts-based. So there will be like some tents set up, maybe where they have, a face painting, or they have activities, they have food that the students have made, or they have entertainment. It's common to see like a musical performance, or maybe a musical, like a musical or a play or a musical performance with maybe taiko. Then we have graduation ceremony, which even from elementary school is a really big deal in Japan. So be prepared for a high degree of formality, moving chorus performances, speeches from the principal and student representatives, sobbing parents and students, and overall an emotionally draining day. Especially if you're really close to your students, it can be hard. So be on your best behavior and your best suit for this day, because this is what really counts. This is what it looks like to graduate. And then finally, we have the closing ceremony, which is usually held some days after the graduation on the last day of the academic term or school year. This is a ceremony that officially brings this term or school year to a finish. It looks like this. Okay, so now for a word about getting involved in club activities. They're an enormous part of the students' lives, especially at junior and senior high school levels. So you'll notice that a lot of the students will want to talk about their sport that they play. Most of your conversations will revolve around soccer or baseball or whatever they do. But if you want to actually join a club yourself and be involved, just be warned that sometimes there are miscommunications between ALTs and JTLs about the level of commitment that's required for this. So please just find out in advance. Is it okay if I don't show up to all the practices, or I don't show up to all the weekend meets? Or should I expect to be, participate in absolutely everything for this club? Sometimes the ALTs don't want to do all of that, but they still want to be part of the club, and the school really wants them to be involved in everything. So it's just a matter that you should discuss with the teacher of the club or some of your English teachers, staff at the school, to find out, make sure that you know what you're signing up for before you commit to a club. Other ways to get involved. We're running out of time, so I'll keep it short. But eating lunch with colleagues and students, you can probably ask the panelists about this afterwards. But if you have a chance to eat with either the students or your colleagues, I would highly recommend that. Don't eat by yourself if you don't have to. It's a good time for you to share information, speak English, etc. Cleaning with the colleagues and students is kind of the same thing. You may or may not be asked to do it. If the school is okay with you doing it, I would say definitely join in and clean with the other staff and students. It could be a good opportunity to make some new friends or deepen relationships. Visit other subject classes. So find out how they teach other subjects in the school. It's very illuminating for your English classes to find out how the students learn other subjects. But don't just pop in unannounced. That's a really bad idea. So always consult with the teacher who you want to visit their class and just let them know in advance, like, is it okay if I stop in for 30 minutes and observe your class? Because sometimes the ALT can be a distraction if the students notice you in the back of the classroom. Attending work parties, great opportunity to see your teachers like let their hair down a little bit and talk about things they wouldn't talk about at work or that you can't talk about the next day. So try to attend, even if you don't drink. I don't think it's a problem. Plenty of the teachers when I went to them were drinking tea. Some people didn't like to drink alcohol or couldn't, so don't worry about that either. Going on faculty trips, I never went on any myself, but I was kind of jealous of the ALTs who I heard that did go on them. You might have a trip where your teachers, kind of pool their money together and they go somewhere and they spend like a night, maybe at a resort or something like that. They go to an onsen or they go hiking or they do something fun, do karaoke, have a party at night. So these can be great bonding experiences where you can get closer to the staff. Okay, so with that, our ALT friend now has an A. Feels good, right? While these 4 points are not a comprehensive list of all the qualities of an effective ALT, I think that these are some of the most important things that you can pay attention to in order to make a good first impression, build solid work relationships, and maintain a good reputation and be considered more of a full staff member than a guest. Before I end, I will tell you that we do have some resources on our Claire website for ALTs. We have something called the ALT Handbook and the Teaching Materials Collection. These are available. If you go to our official webpage, it looks like this. We've got a tab called Current JETS. Just go down to Publications and Forms for JETS, the third one. And then in the right-hand column there with the green, it says ALT CIR SEA Handbook. So on this page, you can find the ALT Handbook, as well as teaching materials resources, which both of these resources are just kind of advice from ALTs about teaching and also lesson plans that you can use directly in your classes. So don't forget about these resources. This is an example of like what a lesson plan would be. So the lesson plans and the teaching materials resources are separated by school levels, so elementary, junior high, senior high. We also offer a grant for JLPT, as I said, in 3 and above. So if you're studying Japanese and you want to take the test and you pass, go ahead. You can send your documents into Claire and get that reimbursed. TEFL grant, too, if you want to get an online certification to teach English. The application period usually starts in April or May, so you have to wait until next year. Unfortunately, you can't at this point. But when that comes around, feel free to apply for that and to improve your teaching skills. Okay, unfortunately, I was a little bit behind schedule, so I don't have too much time for questions, but are there any questions before we finish up? For one, sorry.
Sorry, just a quick one.
Yeah.
In terms of giving omiyage, for those of us who have omiyage already, when is the most appropriate time to do that? Because I understand not all teachers will be around at the moment because of holidays.
Yeah. Okay, so as far as when to give omiyage, I think there's a couple ways you could go about it. Assuming that you have enough for everyone, yeah, right? You might have to like get to the school and like check that first. But if you have enough for everyone, you probably could just wait until you come back. Like maybe you could ask like the vice principal or your teacher, like, I have an omiyage, I want to kind of pass it out, but it seems like there's a lot of people gone right now. Like, do you have any idea like maybe when some of the teachers will be back? Like find out a date, like a schedule of maybe when they'll come back. And if that's like 2 weeks from now and your omiyage is going to expire, then you can't really help it. So you just need to give it. But if it'll last, I would just, wait until they all get back. Otherwise, if you don't have enough too, you could just, like I said earlier, you could just put it out on a table and be like, sorry, but I don't have enough for everyone, so first come, first serve. Thanks. One more? Yeah.
So I have stuffed animals for specific people, but not, because I was really big. So I knew that I would only be buying for like people, does it have to be a sweet, or am I allowed to get a stuffed kangaroo?
A little. Yeah, I think I have one too. I think it's okay. I mean, I'm not Japanese, so I can't be an authority on this. But from my perspective, I don't think it's a big deal, as long as it's not something expensive. right? Something small and inexpensive is probably okay. In general, omiyage, because I don't like this translation that people say souvenir, because souvenir can mean other things in English, I think, than just sweets. But it really does refer to sweets. So when people come back, they'll definitely get sweets. But I think it's still okay. I think you should just give those gifts like privately, like on the side, like maybe if you have a second, like they're in the tea room or something and you catch them, or you can just put it on their desk and like, kind of discreetly. It's best. Okay. Unfortunately, we're out of time at the end here. So I have an announcement to make. We'll have a 15-minute break for the panel discussion. But before that, you have received attendance cards at the beginning of the seminar. So please turn these in after you leave this room at the end of the panel discussion. So you don't need to turn them in now. Turn them in at the end of the panel discussion at 4:35. And then I think you already have your handouts. So that was the other announcement that I was going to make. So if you don't have a handout, please contact someone from the staff. But other than that, please enjoy your break. And if you have any other questions, ask the panelists afterwards. Thank you so much for listening. Take care.